Halloween used to be the only night I wasn't afraid to walk home late. The streets were alive, kids laughing, porch lights glowing, and everyone pretending to be scared of things that weren't real. But that night I learned what real fear feels like. And it started with a dare I should have never accepted. My name's Daniel. I grew up in a small town where not much ever happened. Every Halloween my friends and I would try to one-up each other with stupid dares. That year my friend Kyle suggested something different. He said we should sneak into the old house behind the railroad tracks, the one everyone called the widow's house. The place had been abandoned for nearly 20 years. Some people said an old woman had died there, others claimed she was still inside, waiting for anyone dumb enough to trespass. The locals avoided it completely. Even the city workers refused to cut the weeds around the property. We met near the tracks around midnight. Kyle had his flashlight and our other friend, Chris, brought his camera. The air smelled like iron and damp leaves. The closer we got, the quieter it became, like even the crickets didn't want to make a sound. The house appeared through the trees, a tall, rotting structure with broken windows and a porch that sagged like it was tired of standing. The front door was chained shut, so we went around back. There was a small basement window, cracked open just enough for us to squeeze through. Chris went first, then Kyle, and finally me. Inside, the air was cold and thick with dust. Every sound, every breath, seemed louder than it should have been. The basement was cluttered with old furniture covered in sheets, boxes of clothes, and jars filled with things I didn't want to identify. We made our way upstairs. The floors creaked under our feet and the walls were lined with pictures. Portraits of people staring straight at us, their faces faded, their eyes almost scratched out. "Yo, look at this," Kyle whispered. He pointed to one photo that hadn't aged like the others. It was crystal clear, 3 boys standing in front of the same house, wearing the same expressions we had that night. That's us," Chris said quietly. I laughed it off, assuming it was just our reflection or a trick of the light. But when I looked again, the photo was gone. In its place was a blank, cracked frame. We kept exploring, trying to shake the unease. Upstairs, we found a long hallway lined with closed doors. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to the last one at the end. It was painted a dark red, and unlike the others, it was locked from the outside. "Let's open it," Kyle said, grinning. He found a broken piece of metal and started prying at the latch. I told him to stop, that we'd already seen enough, but he didn't listen. When the door finally opened, a gust of air hit us like someone exhaled from the other side. Inside was a small bedroom. The bed was neatly made, and on the wall above it hung dozens of newspaper clippings. Chris turned his camera light toward them. Each article talked about missing people from our town, teenagers, travelers, even an old mailman. But what made my stomach drop was that all the articles had the same handwritten note across them in red ink. "Trespassers never leave." That's when we heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway we just walked through. Chris turned off his light immediately. We stood frozen, listening as the steps grew louder. Someone was in the house with us. Kyle whispered, "It's probably a squatter." But even he didn't believe it. The footsteps stopped right outside the room. Then, the doorknob turned. Chris aimed his camera at the door, whispering, "Who's there?" The door creaked open halfway, but there was no one in sight. The hallway was empty. Then from behind us, a voice, soft, almost like a whisper in the ear, said, "You shouldn't have come." I spun around, shining my light everywhere, but no one was there. Chris's camera glitched for a second, showing static, and when it cleared, someone was there. A woman standing in the corner of the room. Pale, thin, with long gray hair that looked wet. She wore a tattered black dress and her eyes were hollow. Kyle screamed and ran, pushing past us. Chris followed, his camera shaking wildly. I was the last one out, too terrified to look back. I could hear her footsteps chasing us down the hall. We reached the stairs, but Kyle tripped on a broken step and fell. When I reached him, he was clawing at the floorboards, trying to pull himself away from something that was grabbing his ankle. I saw a pale hand coming out from under the stairs, gripping him tightly. I kicked at it, yelling for him to get up. He broke free and we ran through the basement toward the window we came in from. Chris went first, then Kyle. As I turned to climb out, I looked back one last time. The woman was standing at the bottom of the stairs, staring at me. Her lips moved, but I couldn't hear what she said. Then as I crawled out, I heard her whisper again, closer this time, "Leave and don't come back." We sprinted through the woods until we reached the tracks again. None of us said a word. Chris was shaking so badly he dropped his camera. When we looked back toward the house, it was dark, silent, and still. The next morning we went back to get the camera. mostly to prove to ourselves that what we saw wasn't real. But when we got there, the house was gone. I don't mean torn down, it was gone. Just an empty lot, with overgrown weeds and the faint outline of a foundation. We tried to show people where it had been, but no one believed us. The police said there hadn't been a house behind those tracks for decades. That night, I watched the footage Chris managed to record. Most of it was static and darkness. But near the end, there was one clear frame. It showed the three of us running down the hallway, and behind us, the woman standing at the top of the stairs watching. To this day, I don't know what we saw or if that house ever really existed. But sometimes when I walk near the tracks, I hear faint footsteps behind me, and a whisper that reminds me why I'll never trespass again. If you enjoyed these disturbing true trespassing horror stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling tales. Some warnings are meant to protect you. Others exist to keep something else from getting out. I didn't understand that until the summer I ignored the no trespassing sign near Miller's Creek. My name's Aaron, and I grew up in a quiet town in northern Maine. When I was 16, my friends and I used to ride our dirt bikes deep into the woods behind our neighborhood. It was our escape from everything: school, parents, and boredom. But about 6 miles into the trail, there was this rusted metal gate with a big red sign that read, "Private property, and no trespassing." We'd always stop there. Everyone said the land belonged to some old man who didn't take kindly to strangers. But one day, curiosity got the better of us. It was late July, hot and humid. My friend Tyler dared me to go past the gate, said I was too scared to do it. I laughed and told him I'd go as far as I wanted. So I lifted my bike over the gate, ignoring the rust that crumbled under my hands, and started down the trail. The dirt path was narrow and overgrown, twisting deeper into the woods. The air grew cooler the farther I went, and I noticed how unnaturally quiet it got. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my bike's tires crunching against the ground. After about 10 minutes, I came across something strange: an old cabin. It looked untouched for decades. The windows were covered with wooden boards, and the door hung open like it had been forced. But what really caught my attention was the smell. It was thick, like wet soil mixed with something rotten. I called out, "Hello?" but no answer. The place was dead silent. I should have turned around right then, but something about that cabin pulled me in. I parked my bike and stepped inside. The floorboards groaned beneath my boots. The interior was almost empty except for a wooden chair and a pile of clothes in the corner. There was also an old lantern hanging from a hook, still coated in fresh soot, as if someone had just used it. Then I heard it, a faint knock from the back of the cabin. I froze. It wasn't the sound of something falling or the house settling. It was rhythmic, 3 slow knocks. "Hello?" I said again, louder this time. Nothing. I walked toward the noise. The back door was shut, but there was a small window beside it. When I looked out, I saw the trees and something else. A figure standing about 20 feet away. At first, I thought it was a person wearing a black jacket, but then it moved. Not walked, moved like it glided slightly side to side. I blinked and it was gone. I backed away from the window, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Then, from somewhere outside, a voice called out, "You shouldn't be here." It wasn't angry, it was calm. Too calm. "Who's there?" I shouted, stepping toward the front door. No answer. Just the sound of wind picking up and leaves brushing against the cabin walls. I grabbed my phone to call Tyler, but there was no signal. Typical for this deep in the woods. So I decided to leave. But as I reached the front door, I noticed something that made my blood run cold: muddy footprints leading into the cabin. Not mine. They started right at the doorway and disappeared toward the back room. I turned toward the corner where I'd seen that pile of clothes earlier. Except it wasn't clothes anymore, it was a person. A man. He was sitting with his head hanging low, his skin gray and his eyes open but empty. His lips were moving slightly, whispering something over and over. I couldn't make out the words at first, but when I leaned closer, I finally heard it. "He doesn't like visitors." Then his head jerked upward. His mouth opened unnaturally wide, and from somewhere behind me came another voice, deeper, raspier. "Leave him be." I ran. I didn't care what I tripped over or where the path led. I just ran until I reached the gate again, my lungs burning. Tyler was waiting there, laughing, until he saw my face. "Dude, what happened? You look like you saw a ghost." I told him everything, how there was someone inside, how someone else had spoken to me, how it didn't feel human. He didn't believe me, of course. But when we looked back down the trail, we both saw it. The man I'd found sitting inside the cabin was now standing just beyond the gate, watching us. Same gray skin. Same hollow eyes. His head tilted slightly like he was studying us. We took off on our bikes and never looked back. The next day we told my dad what happened. He was quiet for a long time before saying, "That land isn't safe, Aaron. It used to belong to the Millers." He told me that the Miller family owned a farm out there decades ago. They vanished one night after reporting trespassers near their property. Search parties went out but no one ever found them. The only thing they discovered was a half-burned cabin and a freshly painted sign, "No trespassing." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that gray figure standing by the gate. A week later, I worked up the courage to go back during the day, just to prove to myself it was all in my head. But when I got there, the entire gate was gone. The path behind it had been filled with dirt, like it never existed. And yet, nailed to a nearby tree was the same sign. Private property, no trespassing. Except now, written in red paint underneath, were 3 new words that hadn't been there before. He knows you. I turned around and left the woods for good. Sometimes, late at night, I still get the feeling someone's watching my house from the treeline. Once I went to the window and thought I saw movement, but all that was there was that same old sign, half buried in the dirt, leaning against my fence. And scrawled across it in that same red paint was one more message: "Don't come back." If you enjoyed these disturbing true trespassing horror stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling tales. Some people chase adrenaline. Others just stumble into it. I was the latter. What happened to me in that forest wasn't about bravery or stupidity, it was about crossing into something that was never meant to be found. My name's Mason, and back in 2014, I was working as a landscape photographer. I loved exploring remote places, abandoned mines, ghost towns, anything that told a forgotten story. One fall afternoon, I was driving through rural Pennsylvania when I came across a narrow dirt road that wasn't on my GPS. There was a metal gate halfway open and a rusted sign hanging crookedly that read, "U.S. Government Property, no trespassing." I'd seen plenty of old signs like that before. Most were leftovers from the Cold War era, warnings for places that had long been forgotten. I figured this was the same. I should have kept driving. Instead, curiosity got the better of me. I parked my truck off the road, grabbed my camera, and slipped past the gate. The trail wound deep into the trees, the ground soft with moss and dead leaves. After about 15 minutes, I found something that made me stop. A set of steel doors half buried into the hillside covered in vines. It looked like the entrance to a bunker. The doors were sealed shut with a thick padlock, but the metal was old and brittle. One good hit from a rock and it snapped. I pulled the doors open and felt a wave of cold air rush out. The tunnel beyond was dark, pitch black, but I had my flashlight. My heart was pounding, but the explorer in me was thrilled. The air smelled like rust, dust, and something faintly chemical. About 20 feet in, the concrete walls opened into a large chamber. Broken lights hung from the ceiling and old machinery lined the walls. I snapped a few photos, the flash lighting up the room in short bursts. Each time, I noticed something new: maps on the wall, a few rusted cots, and a metal table with straps bolted to it. That's when I noticed the humming. It was faint at first, like the distant buzz of electricity. I followed it deeper into the bunker, passing through another hallway that led to a smaller door. This one had warning labels all over it: biohazard, do not enter, restricted access. It looked like a scene out of an old military movie. I couldn't resist. I pushed the door open. The room inside was small and circular, with glass observation windows along the walls. In the center stood a metal tank about 6 feet tall, filled with murky green liquid. My flashlight flickered as I got closer. Inside the tank, something was floating. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, or a large dog, but when I got closer, I realized it had human features. Not fully human, though. The proportions were wrong. Its limbs were too long, its face stretched unnaturally, the skin pale and translucent. The worst part? Its eyes were open. That's when I heard the sound of footsteps. I froze. Someone else was down there. I turned off my light and held my breath. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, echoing off the metal walls. I backed toward the hallway, trying not to make a sound, but my boots scraped against the floor. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, from the darkness behind me, a metallic clang, like a door slamming shut. I turned my light back on. The main door I'd come through was now closed. Locked. Panic set in. I started banging on it, yelling, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice bounced off the walls, echoing endlessly. Then, through the crack under the door, I saw something move. A shadow. It wasn't walking, it was crawling. I backed away, shining my flashlight down the hall. For a second I saw nothing. Then from the corner, a pale hand reached around the wall. Followed by another. It was the thing from the tank. It moved in this jerky, unnatural way like its body didn't know how to function. It crawled toward me on all fours, its head tilting sideways, mouth twitching. I ran. I sprinted through the corridor, searching for another exit, my flashlight bouncing wildly. The sound of its limbs scraping against the metal floor echoed behind me. I could hear it breathing, wet, heavy breaths like something trying to mimic a human sound. I found a ladder leading up to a hatch. I climbed as fast as I could, my hands slipping on the rungs. I could hear it getting closer, its fingers tapping against the metal below me. When I reached the top, I pushed the hatch open with all my strength. It barely budged, rusted shut. I rammed my shoulder into it again and again until it finally gave way, bursting open into the night air. I pulled myself out, gasping. Behind me, I heard something slam against the metal door below. Then silence. I kicked the hatch closed and ran through the woods until I found my truck. I didn't stop driving until I hit the main highway. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying what I saw, those open eyes inside the tank, the way that thing moved. I told myself it was some government experiment from decades ago, long forgotten. Maybe it wasn't even alive anymore, just some biological specimen that reacted to my presence. But then, 2 days later, I got a call. The number was unknown. When I answered, no one spoke at first. I could just hear breathing. Then a distorted voice whispered, "You were not authorized." The line went dead. I tried to go back to the area a week later, but the dirt road was gone. Completely blocked off. Trees had been cut down and replaced with fencing. A new sign hung on the gate. Area closed, environmental hazard. There was no trace of the bunker. I quit exploring after that. My camera gear still sits in my garage collecting dust. But sometimes when I'm editing old photos, I swear I can see something in the background, something pale, out of focus, watching. Last week I got another call from an unknown number. This time when I picked up there was no breathing. Just a faint humming sound. The same sound I'd heard deep inside that bunker. If you enjoyed these disturbing true trespassing horror stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling tales.